that was the Dancing Testicles with their new pop platter, Get Yourself Down, a rather controversial title, I fancy, but certainly got my hips gyrating to that real groovy dance beat, Daddy-O. But now it's 3 o'clock and time for story time.
Hello, children. Do you remember the Folly of Mr. Moly? You do? Well, if you're sitting comfortably, I shall now read to you part 2 of that story. You may remember that little Miss Moly was very unhappy during her early life due to the mental cruelty that was caused by her father, Mr. Moly. Well, time has moved on, and we catch up on our story within the kitchen of the Moly home, where little Miss Moly's mother had just prepared the evening dinner. It was Mr. Moly's favorite. It consisted of a bed of raw cabbage and dried corn with a smattering of snail slime and just a sprinkling of grated bird droppings. Little Moly hated it, but her father insisted it was good for her. Therefore, she had to eat it. She was just sat down when Mr. Moly entered the room, and he looked very, very tired. "Had a busy day in the studio, darling," said Mrs. Moly.
I've had a terrible day,
said Mr. Moly, as he slumped down in his chair.
We did 6 backups.
6 backups? said Mrs. Moly. What's a backup? Little Moly inquired. Well, said Mrs. Moly, your father's work is mainly defending President Trump at all costs. But sometimes he comes out with something so retarded, it makes your daddy's job very difficult, because he knows that all his subscribers will be waiting for his reaction on his evening show. So what he does is he records backup shows. That is, shows that have nothing to do with the day's events, and that gets him off the hook. Understand? Just then, Mike, Mr. Moly's best friend, entered the room. I just heard you've been hard at it with my husband today, said Mrs. Moly. What? said Mike nervously, as he turned to Mr. Moly with a very puzzled look on his face. Mr. Moly spoke out.
Yes, I was just telling them, Michael, that we had to laboriously do 6 backups today.
He then gave Mike a knowing wink. Oh, of course, said Mike nervously. Yeah, 6 backups. He gave out a big sigh and then started helping himself to some dinner. Daddy, said little Moly, looking very anxious. Could I invite a friend for a sleepover on Friday?
A friend?
said Mr. Moly.
You have a friend?
Yes, we met yesterday, and I really like her, and I just thought that...
And I'm no longer your friend, is that it?
Mr. Moly got out of his chair and started pacing up and down the floor, giving his daughter an evil look.
So enlighten me, child, because I can't remember interviewing this so-called friend.
Little Moly was very nervous. No, Father. Her eyes were starting to well up with tears.
And have you forgotten what I told you on your 3rd birthday?
Her father's face started to take on the form of a snake that had just swallowed a porcupine. Yes, you said that if I wanted a friend, I have to go through you first. Little Moly was shaking, and by now she was starting to wet herself.
That's right. You must always consult me first.
And he once again gave an evil stare. She's a very nice girl, said Mrs. Moly.
Well then, why don't we arrange a little chat with... what's her name?
Her name is Amina. The room went quiet.
Amina? Now, where does she get a name like that?
Little Moly started to get agitated and looked to her mother for support. Amina's parents come from Pakistan, said Mrs. Moly, who by now was absolutely shitting herself.
What did you just say? Pakistan? Are you kidding me?
Little Moly burst into tears. Now look what you've done! Mrs. Moly ran to her daughter's rescue. Her father exploded, and pointing his finger straight at his daughter, he screamed out,
How many times have I explained the bell curve to you?
Lots of times, said little Moly. Her mother then went to her rescue. Come on, darling, let's get you into a nice shower and then straight to bed for an early night, okay? As they left the kitchen and made their way to the bathroom, they heard Mr. Moly shout.
And by the way, you can forget about tonight's bedtime story. It was going to be about the downfall of Mussolini, but as a punishment, it won't be happening tonight. No way!
Sometime later, Mrs. Moly reappeared.
Mike, could you possibly excuse us? I'd like to have a word with my husband in private.
Sure, no problem, Mrs. M. Mike then turned around and spoke to Mr. Moly. Could you possibly stop by my room before you go to bed? I've got some ideas about a couple of shows that I'd like to discuss with you.
Oh, sounds interesting. What kind of ideas are you thinking about?
Well, first was a possible link-up with Alex Jones, to discuss his theory that North Korea doesn't actually exist, and it was all created in Hollywood.
Good God, I hadn't heard that one before. What a scoop Alex has got there.
And another one on Diamond and Silk, who apparently have some groundbreaking stuff about the whole climate change thing. And I thought possibly, I don't know, maybe a review on the new Popeye movie. And lastly, I was wondering if you fancy doing The Truth About Jerry Lewis?
Oh, I don't think I have a biography of him in my library.
Oh, well, I kind of guessed you'd be interested, so I've got one coming from Amazon.
Oh, good boy.
So, see you later then?
Well, of course, Michael. See you later.
Oh, and by the way, we got a lovely email from a woman in California who watched our Truth About Santa Claus show, and she thanks you for your honesty, and she just wanted to say that, well, she took your advice and told her kids that Santa wasn't true, and it's changed their lives forever.
Oh, it's so refreshing to hear that, It's good to know we're making a difference in the world, destroying those myths that destroy children.
Actually, I was thinking about, why don't we do a show about Easter, destroy that myth?
No. Santa Claus is a mythical figure, whereas Easter's all about Jesus. We can't do that.
But I thought you were an atheist.
Yes, I don't believe in God, but I believe in Jesus. I mean, have you been listening to my shows? I'm always quoting Jesus.
But Jesus is always talking about his dad up in the sky, no?
Well, listen, why don't you just go to your room and I'll join you later after I've had a little chat with my wife.
Okay, shall I have a little nightcap ready for you?
Oh, stop it. I don't drink, but maybe a small one.
Okay. Good night, Mrs. Moly.
Good night, Michael.
Mike then left and quietly closed the door. Mrs. Moly sat down at the table.
Well,
She said,
I may as well tell you I took Molly to a psychiatrist last week because I'm very concerned about her mood swings.
A psychiatrist? Whatever for?
He said she needs to get out more and meet other people. She's very lonely.
How can she be lonely when she's with me every day? She doesn't need to meet people.
You just don't get it, do you?
What?
He recommended that she starts going to the local school, which would enable her to communicate with other children. Her friend Amina also goes to that school.
Mr. Moly was not pleased.
She's not going to that school. It's run by a bunch of brainwashing, multicultural fucking communists,
He said with small pieces of cabbage spraying out onto the caterpillar souffle.
And by the way, Amina's parents are very nice people and very wealthy, I have you know.
Very wealthy, are they? No doubt they have a chain of convenience stores, do they?
No, they don't. Mrs. Abidi happens to be a doctor who specializes in cancer research, and Mr. Abidi is a teacher at the local school and has his own book publishing business.
What? He's a teacher and he has his own book publishing company? So, where exactly do they live?
They live right here, next door to us.
Next door?
Yes, next door. They've lived there for 3 years, but of course, with us having a 10-foot wooden fence topped with barbed wire and 23 security cameras, it isn't exactly conducive to getting to know the neighbors, is it?
Mr. Moly went into deep thought and realized the possibilities.
Look, maybe I'll check out that school and see what they're up to, but I'm doing it for Molly. You do understand that, don't you?
Oh yes, you're doing it for Molly. How thoughtful.
She said sarcastically. That evening, by a stroke of luck, Mr. Moly noticed an ad in the local paper. Wanted, temporary history teacher for 3 to 5 days at the Joseph Karofsky Elementary School. It seemed that one of the staff was on sick leave. The following morning, he turned up at the school, and after a brief meeting with the head teacher, Mr. Yuri Krapinov, he was given the job and immediately put to work. The class looked bewildered as he entered the room, especially when he started pacing round the floor, staring at them in a very creepy manner. He then handed out blank sheets of paper to each pupil. He gave them all 3 questions and asked them to write down the answers. Unfortunately, some of the children were not Canadian-born and hadn't quite mastered the English language. Therefore, they couldn't possibly give an answer. Mr. Moly homed right in on a few of them, and after looking at their blank sheets of paper, he ripped them up and started shouting, saying things like,
You failed, as all your people will fail. Do you really think you can come over here and succeed?
He then started going on about IQ levels and how the West only pays for intelligence. Some of the children were in an awful state, and they sadly all went home in tears. The following morning, he was summoned to Mr. Krapenoff's office, who had with him the father of one of the children, and he wasn't in a very good mood. He was a very big man, and as he walked slowly towards Mr. Moly, he said, You offended my son, and that means you offended me.
Well, I didn't know.
And I was told you thought he was a Muslim. Is that right? Do you want to know why we've both got a brown complexion? Because we just got back from 2 weeks in Florida. So there.
Florida?
Said Mr. Moly. The gentleman then grabbed Mr. Moly by the lapels of his jacket.
Wait a minute. I know you. Oh, I very much doubt it. I don't think I've ever met you in my life.
Of course you haven't, because when I'm round at your place...
My dear fellow, I very much doubt if you've been to my place.
Oh, yes, I have. You've got a young daughter, right? Who stands at the bedroom window with a flashlight, doing all that Morse code stuff. Am I right?
Morse code? What the...
And the reason you don't recognize me is I empty your garbage bin around 7 a.m. while you're probably fast asleep. And you don't need to work, do you? Because you're a fucking millionaire.
When the revolution comes, his head will roll,
shouted Mr. Krapenoff. And just at that moment, this very rough and ready chap head-butted Mr. Moly, and he fell to the floor. There was blood everywhere, and Mr. Krapenoff immediately got on the phone to the school cleaner in order to get the mess cleaned up. It certainly wasn't Mr. Moly's day. When the cleaning lady arrived, she took one look at Moly and screamed, You bastard! It's you, isn't it? As she stared into his face. You're the man what broke up me and my partner. Do you know what you've done? Mr. Moly looked terrified.
You've got the wrong man.
The wrong man? It's on YouTube for everyone to see, you fucking prick.
I'm sorry, I don't remember, but if I did, I probably had good reason to. You were probably just another one of those premenstrual feminist social justice warriors whose sexual market value was down to 0 and who was probably sucking resources from some poor guy who'd fucking had enough of the crap that you women spew out on a regular basis. She whacked him with the head of her mop, followed by a knee in the groin. Mr. Moly fell to the floor and was in total agony. She continued with her verbal onslaught. You told him to dump me, but what you and him didn't know at the time, I was pregnant and I got kicked out of my apartment. Oh dear.
Because I couldn't afford to pay the rent on my own.
Well, look, I
then had to live on the streets for a week before moving into and sharing a filthy place with a couple of junkies, of which one tried to rape me.
Yes, very, very sad.
I subsequently lost my job because I couldn't get myself together and then ended up back on the streets again.
Oh dear.
Finally, I had to move in with my parents, which was not a good idea. During which time my mother and I argued constantly. And that tragically left my father having a heart attack and dying right in front of me. And by the way, my partner and I are back together again, and he confessed to me that he was just going through a difficult phase when he called you up in your fucking shitty little show.
But I didn't know you were pregnant at the time.
Of course you didn't. That's why people like you shouldn't be doing a discussion about a couple's relationship on YouTube with only one member of that relationship present. You're a jumped up fucking con man who should be taken down.
Yes, I'd love to chat with you, but listen, I'm a philosopher, right? I've got the biggest philosophy show in the world, and looking at my watch, I really have to go now because I've got a show to do tonight.
Tell me something, do you have a license to be a counsellor?
No, not as such, no, but I've experienced lots of bad things. I was spanked as a child, and my mother was really horrible.
And have you got a degree in philosophy?
No, but I've read lots of books on this subject, and I've written my own book, actually, called The Art of the Argument. It's very good. And then with her mop, she hit him on the head again.
When Mr. Moly arrived home, Mrs. Moly stared at him in disbelief.
Oh my God, what happened to you?
He refused to answer and went straight into his studio. That evening, when they sat down to fried beetroot and mushrooms with a sprinkling of Irish clover, they heard the sound of people shouting in the street. It got louder and louder until they could clearly hear what they were shouting. Greeks out, Germans out, make Canada great again. Mrs. Moly opened the window.
Oh my God, they've got torches and they're carrying Nazi flags.
Oh, I'm scared, Mummy, said little Molly. Oh, relax. They're only exercising their right to free speech.
But look out there. There must be, 500 of them, I'd guess. What are we going to do?
Oh, stop fussing, woman. It's only words.
Yes, words like Greeks out, Germans out, Jews out, make Canada great again.
Take it easy, darling. Words can't hurt you. She closed the window. Look, I've got a box full of my new book, The Art of the Argument. I tell you what, I'll go out there and distribute a few amongst them.
What?
They can all have a good read through, and maybe we can all sit down together and discuss this in a more civilized way.
You can't reason with them. They're a bunch of fucking Nazis.
She then pulled a gun from the drawer.
I'll get them to move. Just watch me.
Mr. Moly grabbed her arm. Now listen to me, woman. If you add the letter S to words, you get swords.
Swords? What the fuck are you talking about?
Think about the words free speech. If you take the word free away, you're left with speech. If you take the letter S away, you're left with peach. And if you replace one of the letters E with A, you get peach, the fruit. Then put the letters I and M and you've got impeach. And then we lose our president. Mrs. Moly glared at him.
You're fucking mad. And just to remind you, you're Canadian. We don't have a president, remember?
We must protect Trump. That's where the bulk of my income comes from.
Oh, fuck off. I'll leave you to your crossword puzzle gymnastics while I go out there and do your fucking job in protecting our family.
What the hell is wrong with you?
I'll tell you what's wrong with me. You.
What?
I'm sick and tired of your fake philosophy.
Fake?
The art of the argument. Did you get that from Trump then? The art of the deal. And tell me, when have you ever been in an argument on your show? You never debate anyone. You only get guests on that agree with you. And as for that diamond and silk, all that's missing from them are a pair of straw hats and a couple of banjos.
That's racist.
No, it's not. It's satire. Didn't you read the text at the beginning of this video?
What text?
And by the way, what's the point of anyone buying your book? If they really want to win an argument, all they have to say is, not an argument. Because that's what you do when someone challenges you on your show. End of story. Anyway, it isn't really a book, is it?
What do you mean?
It's not a very big book, is it? To me, it's nothing more than a pregnant pamphlet.
Oh.
Now, if you'll just excuse me.
Just at that moment, Mike appeared. Hey, what's going on? There's lots of men out there with big torches.
Michael!
She screamed.
You're naked!
Oh, God, sorry. I was lying on the bed waiting for Mr. Moly and I heard all that noise.
Waiting for my husband? Naked?
No, no, my dear. Mike always locks his door and I always knock before I go in. It gives him a chance to put on his gown.
Would that be that Japanese kimono you gave him last Christmas?
Yes, that's the one. Oh, I love that gown.
Oh, and that's another thing. I was told recently that you both block subscribers.
That's not true. We have a software problem. Isn't that right, Mike? Mike looked confused. Yes, it's a software problem. It's called the blocking virus. Thank God we don't have a hardware problem. Mike giggled in that kind of camp way that homosexuals often do. So, said Mrs. Moly angrily, shall I go out there and sort these people out, or do any one of you men want to volunteer? I would love to, my dear, but if anything happened to me, what would happen to Western civilization? It would just crumble. And I've got to wash my hair.
Okay, that's it settled then.
She then went outside and faced the mob. Out on the street, she was most surprised to see many of her neighbors were also out there. Mr. Abidi, the father of little Molly's friend, was also there with his small son, Amini's little brother. Mrs. Moly told the protesters in no uncertain terms to leave the area or she would call the police. But they just ignored her and started to sing the song Zorba the Greek, but with very crude lyrics. Little Moly was terrified listening to all the noise. She turned to her father and said, "Don't you want to go out and help Mum?" Mr. Moly just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Listen, my dear, your father's a philosopher, and I have a show to do in 15 minutes, and I'm afraid that saving Western civilization is far more important than this rabble out there." "I'm going out to be with Mum," said Moly as she ran towards the door. Mr. Moly tried to stop her, but it was too late. And just at that moment, a car came crashing into the crowd. There were screams and panic as they tried to figure out what had happened. Luckily, no one died, but there were serious injuries. Mrs. Moly, little Moly, and her friend's brother all had broken limbs and were hospitalized for a long time. It was a turning point in all of their lives, and after several months, Mrs. Moly decided she'd had enough of her husband and eventually decided to divorce him after she met a rather nice man in the rehabilitation home. His name was Fred. What she liked about him was he always dressed very smart, not like Mr. Moly with his charity shop shirts, baggy trousers and sandals. She delighted in being taken out once again to nice restaurants where she could enjoy real food like a nice tender steak with onions and French fries. Little Moly, too, had had enough of her father. The last time he came to visit her in the hospital, she was very upset about Mr. Abidi's son, who was at one time in a critical condition. "I hope they lock that terrorist up forever." Mr. Moly smiled. "Oh, my dearest, it wasn't a terrorist. It was a white fellow. The poor chap grew up fatherless just like me, and he was probably spanked too as a child."
"Maybe we should say a prayer for little Raphael and hope that he lives,"
Mr. Moly replied. "No, people die all the time in the world."
People die all the time in the world.
"But maybe if we pray, he'll be okay."
He then said something that she couldn't quite handle. "Well, I have to tell you, I care about my own children than the children of foreigners."
I gotta tell you, but I actually care a little bit more about my own children than the children of foreigners.
And that was the point where nothing would be the same again.
"That's a terrible thing to say. He's just like us."
Oh, come on, girl. It's not that easy to blend when you don't look the same.
Not that easy to blend when you don't look the same.
So when little Moly recovered, she decided to stay with her mum and her new stepfather, Fred. They seemed to get along well together, and he bought her a lovely pink laptop computer after she said she would like to study and become a real philosopher with a degree, unlike her father, who was completely self-taught. As for Mr. Moly, well, he's a millionaire, but at the moment he can't spend a penny of it. Why? Well, he's now in a mental health institution. It all started when his YouTube channel was taken down after a judge ruled it was all full of racism, lies, deception, and quite honestly, a lot of bullshit. After that, he went right off the rails and took to heavy drinking. He would go to bars and rant and rave like he always did.
And it's our job to keep it going.
He was arrested that night after he punched a woman in the face. And a week after that, a man was reported to be throwing his own feces at the monkeys in a Toronto zoo. And so finally he was taken into care. So let's leave little Moly in her bedroom with her music on and looking at her brand new computer and listening to one of her favorite speakers, Mr. Sam Harris.
Take the interview you did with STEFAN Molyneux. Now, STEFAN is a prominent YouTube commentator. He's got a big online following. I have decided that his connections to actual racists and crackpots are too direct for me to be comfortable to talk to him. But there were a few glimpses of fascination with race. What do you do about the fact that the average IQ in Africa is 70 or something? The problem with STEFAN is that there's this glint of fascination in his eye around this topic. This is a kind of moral pornography in his world that when he's talking to people like Jared Taylor comes out as a full-blown fetish of race difference. And, I'm not, I don't share that at all, and I don't think this is, racial difference is something